Picture this. You walk into your bedroom and you see your queen-size bed. It has your favorite comforter on top and the pillows just waiting for somebody to sleep in it. You also have your big flat screen TV hanging on the wall, and to the other wall you see your bedroom window shining through with the sunlight of the beautiful summer day. Now imagine that your queen-size bed has now turned into a small cot, and it only allows one small scratchy blanket. Also, your master bedroom has now turned into a 48 square foot box that is now also your bathroom and your basic living space. You went from having basic human necessities to living in a confined box. Although prisoners' decisions have landed them in the prison cells that they're living in, the reality of life in prison is much different than what most people can imagine. In this speech, I'm hoping to cover the lives of the incarcerated and how these prisoners face struggles being locked up, including the impact on not only their physical health, but their mental health as well. I'm going to cover how they access their health care and how it impacts the prisons and how our country's funding is being distributed. In the United States alone, 1 in 31 adults are under some form of correctional supervision. Although not every one of these individuals are necessarily locked up, it does impact how they're living their lives and how they're taking care of their health while being confined to small living environments. There are few resources that are available to inmates while being confined to prisons, such as yards, and if they're lucky with some funding, maybe a workout room. Mental health is a huge factor in inmates' physical health as well. With over 73 million Americans being obese, studies have shown that the biggest leading cause is people's mental health. Mental health is a huge issue throughout our country, but it's an even bigger issue in prisons. Statistics show that over 25% of prisons inmates struggle with mental health, and most of these inmates aren't being treated for the first time. But it is an even bigger issue when it comes to being guaranteed treatment right away. Treatment for mental health issues is dependent on each prison and depending on how much staffing and funding that is available. Most prisons do not have proper funding or the proper staff to hire full-time psychiatrists or even physicians to treat inmates. If a facility happens to have the funding to hire a physician, their wait times can be very hefty, and it could be months before an inmate is even seen or has a mental eval. These months can be crucial to the life of an inmate and how they adjust to prison life, but because most prisons don't have proper funding, the cheapest option for inmates is usually in a pill form such as antidepressants. Some prisons do have funding for therapy sessions with therapists or counselors, but most inmates do not have that person to turn to. Although mental health has a very big impact on inmates while they are locked up, it also has a huge impact on them when they are released from prison as well. Prison release is a major factor in how these people either take the steps forward to rebuild their lives, or it increases the prison turnaround, where the prisons end up right back where they were locked up typically. The major issues with prison turnaround are inmates not having the proper resources when they are released in the outside world. The stigma around inmates being labeled as felons in the outside world makes it difficult for them to find work and to be able to find support for themselves. This can lead in a huge decrease of their mental health because inmates don't have the proper support after release, such as counseling, finding work, and family support. Over 80% of inmates have some sort of drug addiction and usually relapse upon release. Because most inmates relapse, they usually are breaking rules of parole and end up back in lockup, thus maintaining the turnaround rate. If the proper funding was found, inmates could have the proper setup for release and have resources for counseling and access to medications and health care, thus keeping them from returning to prison and thus lowering the turnaround rate. Health in prison is a very important factor for all inmates, male and female, but studies have shown that females in prison have less access to health care they need versus male prisoners. Over the last 30 years, incarceration rates for women has kept increasing over time because women have special health care needs over men, and it can be difficult to maintain their health due to most costs of feminine products and other health care needs they may need. As discussed before, most prisons don't have the funding for this for psychologists, let alone a gynecologist on call for female inmates. Due to lack of funding in prisons, women often do not receive annual pap smear exams, which can detect precancerous or cancerous tissue in a woman's cervix. They also do not receive any sort of health for pregnancy, and this can lead to many problems in the future. Pregnancy in prison can be a very health issue for women, but it's also a major factor to the risk in postpartum. Women have other health sexual risks as well, so other than pregnancy. Around 43 to 57% of women entering prisons have been sexually abused or physically abused. Funding in prisons is a huge factor in healthcare of the inmates and how it impacts their health. All in all, the health of inmates is becoming more of a popularly discussed topic, and it is going to be a larger reform movement as time goes on. Healthcare is a huge factor in maintaining a healthy life, but it can be a challenge to those who don't always have access to it. Moving forward, we as a country can take the steps we need to not only better our own healthcare needs, but especially those who need it the most. Being behind bars doesn't mean you need to suffer from lack of healthcare, and we as a nation need to keep in mind not to take the luxury of healthcare for granted.